Hello there, you go. Mr. Bordash here to guide you through the Proclamation of 1763 notes. Over the last couple days here in class, we've really been focusing on how the French and Indian War have started to impact the colonies in a multitude of ways. One of the biggest ones is that the new British lands are going to be occupying what was originally Native American land, and that's creating some conflict, and it's making Britain a bit nervous at the prospect of the colonies beginning to push to the west. When we were looking at our notes earlier in the week. Let's go ahead and zoom back in here. What I want you to do with on this notes page, where your 13 colonies are, I want you to take your pencil and I want you to outline what we were calling the Western Frontier. This is going to end up becoming what we know as the Proclamation line of 1763. This is going to be the line where King George III, that's one of the first things he does when he moves into the kingship. He's going to draw this line and he's going to say, colonies, you cannot move further west than this line. We have been engaged in a multitude of wars. And if we can think back, let's come back down. We know that Britain has won the French and Indian War, but it led to Pontiac's War. Pontiac and a whole bunch of native tribes, they were living out here where this area shaded in blue is located. They had good relationships with the French, but the British that have already started to move into that area are not treating them well at all. And the Native Americans want to keep their land. Ultimately, Pontiac, the chief of that tribe, and his allies are not successful. They do lose to the British. But King George III does not want to fight any more wars here with the Native Americans. So he's going to go ahead and draw this line and say, the colonies are already up to about this point, and they've been doing well up until this point, so we'll just say they can't move past this. But let's remember, the colonies are growing fast. They've added just about 2 million people in the course of 100 or 150 years. So he's going to issue the Proclamation of 1763, which is going to do a few things. In class, you received a page that looks a little bit like this and should go onto page 51 within your passport. But I want to start in the middle here because this image really does help us to kind of conceptualize what is going on. When we look here at these geographic landforms, we would know them as mountains. We can put a little MTS. And we have a stop sign, 1763. What this means is that the colonies need to stop at the mountains, and it is issued in 1763. Let's walk ourselves through, though, what is going on and why these things are happening. So let's start up here first with who does it apply to. It is going to apply to the 13 colonies. This is going to be an act, one of the first ones that Britain is going to issue, that is going to be directly related to the 13 colonies. And I'm going to make a note here that the colonies are still very much British. While the colonies up until this point have been acting a bit like they're not British because, that's salutary neglect, the colonies have been allowed to kind of the British have been allowed to stand back a bit to focus on those European affairs. So the colonies have really begun to develop in their own way and start to develop that American identity. However, this proclamation is going to apply directly towards them. And the colonies are like, wait, what? Who is the person who's even issuing this? Because up until this point, it had been King George II who had been ruling over the colonies for so long. But he dies of old age. So it's his grandson that kind of steps into the picture here. Let's zoom up. This is going to be our latest intro into the fray. Let's go ahead and just give him a simple name to remember him by. This is KG3. King George III steps here into the fray, and this is one of the only British monarchs that a lot of people do know about because of his storied legacy. He is going to be the King of England when the colonies go to declare their independence from Britain and start the American Revolution. So we come over here to our next box on who wrote it. The answer is, King George III. And he comes to power at the end of the French and Indian War. He was not in charge of England for much of the war. It was his grandfather. And so when King George comes to power, he knows very little of what is going on in the colonies. So again, he is making these decisions just knowing what other people are telling him or what he kind of remembers. And again, he doesn't want to fight the natives. So that's why he draws that proclamation line, which leads us here to our next box. Why was it issued? It was issued in direct response to Pontiac's War. It was more of a rebellion, but we'll deal with that term more in a couple of months. When we look at Pontiac's skirmishes, rebellion, or war with the British, they are fighting because the British are not fair. And if the British were to go to war with the Native Americans, it likely would have been an easy win for the British, given their far superior technology. The Native Americans, 90% of their population had died out because of diseases at this point. It likely would have been an easy win, but there's a big issue here that we have been talking about. And that issue is that Britain is in a whole bunch of debt. And because of this debt, they don't have very much money. And that's going to continue to be an issue. And they don't want to spend more money on a war that they would probably easily win. So, like, you know what? We just will wait till later to deal with the Native Americans. They can keep their land, and we'll tell our colonists not to move. Initially, the colonists, you might assume, are going to react pretty badly, but actually, they're just going to ignore it at first. Up until this point, right, the colonies have been allowed to operate on their own. While Britain may be passing acts or whatever saying that you have to trade with us, let's say, for example, with the navigation acts, it's not really enforced all that much. So the colonies aren't expecting for the Brits really to be able to enforce this too well, so they just ignore it. But Britain's pretty serious. They say, do not pass go, do not collect $200, do not pass the mountains. And the mountains become a barrier for them. The barrier is the Appalachian Mountains. And Britain is very, very strong about making sure colonists don't do this, because initially the colonists do. And they start to get into these conflicts. It's like when your parents tell you not to do something because something bad will happen and you don't believe them, and then you go to do it, and plot twist, that bad thing actually happened. So what I want to make a note of here is, while yes, the Appalachian Mountains are a barrier, what we are going to see occur, let's throw a little arrow up here and make a quick note. What Britain is going to do is that they are going to send 10,000 troops to the colonies. These troops are going to be in charge of making sure primarily that the colonies are protected, but also that they are not crossing these mountains. And what you can do to help yourself kind of like visualize this, while it is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, you could draw little stick figures on top of these mountains, because troops aren't necessarily standing on the mountaintops making like with guns like a border wall. What they are doing, though, is that they're making sure that the colonies are staying where they're supposed to be, and that the Native Americans also are not crossing the Appalachian Mountains themselves, so that they can kind of keep the peace. There is one issue here, though. For troops, being in the military is their job. And if you work a job, you are expecting to get paid. You are expecting to get money. And that is something Britain does not have a whole bunch of. If anything, their debt's grown. They're actively losing money. And they've yet to raise taxes. They're about to. But in order to manage such a vast territory, you do need troops, and you do need to make sure that the colonies are staying A, protected, but B, that they are staying within their own realms. So there are all of these troops now in the New World. That's going to lead us here to this last box. It's going to make the colonists mad, and it's mad because they wanted the land that they were promised. The colonies bought into the French and Indian War. They sent their sons and husbands off to war that way, and their friends off to war that way, that when the war was won, they would have, I'll come back here in just a moment, all of this blue land to be able to settle. This is very fertile land. There are people making plans for the war, the farms that they're going to be able to do, and the access to trade routes. They're going to become so rich. Well, they're not allowed to access it. Britain is saying, no, you need to stop. You are not allowed to go out there. And if we were to look big picture here at the bottom ribbon, the big idea is that the colonists need to not go past the Appalachian Mountains. Let's get the rest of these boxes up here. That is the big idea. Do not go past the Appalachian Mountains. If you do, many colonists end up getting arrested, and some of them killed. And they do end up, the colonists are able to sneak by. They end up getting involved in Native American affairs that are not very good. So King George III, this is kind of his first power move, and the colonies are like, this isn't what we signed up for. We signed up for a little bit of independence. We also signed up for us to have this land that we fought a war for, that Britain fought a war for. But the colonies aren't able to access it, at least not yet. So that's where we're going to leave things for right now. Again, the Proclamation of 1763 is very interesting, one of my favorite topics, and we can definitely go a little bit more in depth. But this is a nice basic level for us to launch upon to move here into our next essential question, as we begin to look at a lot more of the acts that Britain is going to begin to pass here as they begin to move through. Trying to keep the colonies in line and trying to keep the peace between the colonies and the Native Americans.